The last time I talked about my parents and grandparents, and today I want to finish talking about the last few years that my brother Clint and I lived in Mediapolis. As you remember, we lived in 3 homes in Mediapolis. The third and final house was one that my father built with several of his friends. And it was right across the street from some really good friends, the Korff family. Pete and Gladys Korff and their 5 children. Pete owned a restaurant in downtown Mediapolis, right next to the railroad tracks. I used to always think of it as a bar or a tavern, but let's call it a restaurant. And of course, Gladys, with her 5 children, their 5 children, was a homemaker. The 2 children we remember most are Ed, who was the only son in the Korff family. He was my age, and then the youngest of the siblings was Diane, and she was my brother Clint's age. One of the things I remember fondly was that in the back room of the garage of the Korff family, there was a pool table. And so frequently all the men, Pete, Dad, my brother Ed, and I, we'd all get together and we'd play pool for several hours. And at one point I was pretty good. But then when we moved away from Mediapolis, I didn't play again for another 10 years, and whatever skill I had playing pool pretty much disappeared. We had a group of kids, my brother Clint and I, and then Ed, Diane, and then Eddie Lofgren. Eddie Lofgren lived just a house or 2 away from the Korffs, and he was the son of Dr. Lofgren, the town dentist. All of us spent quite a bit of time together. Talk a little bit about misadventures. Certainly had them as kids. I remember one time the Korffs went on vacation, and Ed had a bicycle, and so Gladys let me use the bicycle, try to learn to ride a bike, and I practiced all day without success. Very frustrating. Went to bed. Next day, got up, tried it again. Very first time on the bike, I stayed on, balanced. I rode up and down the street, and I was so proud of that when my father came home from the newspaper, and I wanted to show him and my mother how well I had learned to ride a bicycle. So I got on the bike and I rode across the intersection, turned around, and I started to come back. Well, there was a car coming. Now, I knew that I was supposed to stop. I knew I was supposed to put my foot on the brake. I knew how to do that, and I didn't. And I rode right into the left rear fender of the car. No one was hurt. It was embarrassing. My father was upset, and the bike was pretty much messed up. When we were living in the Grandpa Belknap's house, one day an older kid and I decided we were going to go over to the local beekeeper's home, and both of us picked up some sticks, and the older boy decided that it would be a great deal of fun just to poke the sticks in the beehives. Following his lead, I did it and he did it, and of course the bees came swarming out, and he dropped his stick and took off, and I just stood there. I didn't know what to do. I panicked. Well, the beekeeper came running out of the house, and he just told me to run like heck back home, which I did, and then he would try to calm down the bees. So I remember running back home, running in the front door, up the stairs, and my mother found some dead bees in my hair. I don't remember having ever been stung. I must have been stung, but I just don't recall that. But I do remember that the beekeeper was stung 12 times, and he was pretty dizzy from that, and he needed some medical treatment. We didn't live very far from the Mediapolis Consolidated School System, kindergarten all the way through high school, so it was very easy to walk there. It seemed like a long distance when I was young, but it really wasn't that far. Otherwise, our parents wouldn't have let us walk. My brother and I would walk together to school. And on the way, there was a bridge across a small creek. I do remember one winter, we were walking across the bridge, and the bridge had these handrails. They were metal handrails that you could just hold on to and make sure that you didn't fall into the creek. And I wanted to test the theory that in the wintertime, your tongue would freeze to metal. So, metal handrails were metal, and I said, well, okay, I'll try that. And sure enough, your tongue will stick to metal in the wintertime. Then I couldn't get my tongue loose. Oh, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? I tried everything I could. And then finally, in desperation, I took my hand, kind of like a karate chop, and I sliced between the handrail and my tongue. It worked. My tongue came loose. I left a little bit of tongue skin on the handrail and then quite a bit of blood in my mouth. Saturday nights were popular in our neighborhood among the men and the boys. Pete had a pool table in the back of his garage. I had mentioned that just a second ago, and so many of the men in the neighborhood would gather. We'd play pool and we'd talk about odds and ends, and it was a lot of fun. About the same time, my father bought our first television set. It was a black and white. And on Saturday nights, if we weren't playing pool at the Corfs across the street, then the men in the neighborhood and the boys would come over and watch Saturday night wrestling. Well, we all knew that it was entertainment. We all knew that it was fake, that professional wrestling wasn't real, but we sometimes did get pretty worked up about watching. I'm going to end today by talking about our move to Washington, Iowa. About 10 days or 2 weeks before the whole family moved to Washington, my father and I went there, just the two of us. There were a number of trees to cut down, and we did. It was a lot of hard work, and my father complimented me on how well I was helping him. I was very proud of that, the fact that my father complimented me. The reason that just the two of us went was I was getting to an age where my father thought I needed to learn the facts of life. So I remember one night we sat down at the dining room table. My dad pulls out a paper book, and we go through it page by page, teaching me about sex, one page at a time, explaining in very, very good detail, nicely, the facts of life. Last thing I'll mention is a misadventure we had. After we had cut down all of those trees and the whole family was in Washington, the trees were all piled up in what seemed like a huge pile, a mountain of trees in the backyard. My brother and I decided to see if we could start a fire. We took some matches. We struck one after another. We weren't successful. We tossed them in. Nothing happened. Strike another match. Each of us took turns, and we weren't very successful. So we gave up, and then we just went back into the house. And we were having dinner when we got a telephone call from one of the brothers who lived next door to us. And he said, "Hey, did you know there's a fire in your backyard?" Wow. So we ran out. Sure enough, there's a blaze. We actually had been successful setting those trees on fire. What a success. That isn't the way our parents viewed it. We had a long discussion about that. Haven't set fire to trees ever since. That's it. Thank you for watching. See you next time.